Okay, so we are live for our first test-free chat, and I'm here with Amy and Sean, and this is like the first time I've done this in like a year, maybe. So I haven't seen that little Hunger Games countdown in a year, but we are live. And so I'm actually start with Amy. Can you just introduce yourself? Tell everybody where you're going to school and your role.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I go to school at Hilton High School, and I'm a college admissions support group ambassador with Miss Jen.
Okay. And my friend Sean from Twitter, who is always out here in this Twitter streets with me. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm just happy to be out here with you. Hi, I'm Sean. I am a former enrollment manager of a decade's worth of time. I am on sabbatical working at a high school, if I could put it in those terms, out here in the DFW Metroplex area in Texas.
Oh, and you know what? I don't know. I feel like we have DMV, but what is DFW?
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that's Dallas Fort Worth.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so
Yep.
we have DMV. We're not really from, and then we have Nova, and then we have
Mhm.
757. So,
Right.
yeah. Okay, so Sean, so this year's a little bit different from you from last year, but I guess the one thing you and I were talking about test optional and how sometimes students are not being given correct information. And so, can you tell us a little bit about the one thing that Amy and I talked about a little bit beforehand is what is a role of an enrollment manager and how does that role impact what's called shaping a class? And can you describe that for our audience?
Yeah. So the enrollment side of things it's a strategic model. Essentially, the historical factor of it is, it's a business model that allows um, the encompassing of all things, and so that's from marketing and alumni and admissions and enrollment, and all of those coming in through a funnel, and we're thinking about it from that standpoint. So the funnel is how students are matriculated or matriculate into the college or representative institution. And so enrollment management factors all of those pieces in and utilizes them to help shape not only the student body, but what the graduation and graduates will look like on the other end. So it's kind of the both and, in addition to the retention piece in the middle of it, keeping students in the college space itself. So enrollment management is a overarching umbrella to admissions and enrollment, retention, and graduation and alumni engagement, if you will. And their job in that, I guess, is ensuring that everything moves through the pipeline and the process with best practices in place, whatever that means for an institution's priorities. So that may be, as it comes to shaping a class or shaping admissions enrollment, may be something in which they have an institutional priority towards building more first generation students to come into the school, or they want to serve more low income, middle income families as they want to continue to diversify their socioeconomic status. And so that's kind of what a enrollment manager does at a kind of base level. The shaping of the class comes from who's setting the institutional priority. That's typically coming from the president, the board, provost, folks in the leadership realm of the university or college. And so those folks set that, direct it towards the enrollment manager. They are then the strategic engagement for how they want to do that. And so when it comes to the shaping portion, they may be looking at a swath of students up to, I keep seeing some of these California colleges who have 100,000 applicants. And so when they're thinking about all of these applicants, they're thinking about how can we make this fit the priority that we have or has been handed down to us. So if it is exactly like I referenced in my example, then they may be reading an applicant's file and comparing each of the students from a specific school and then picking the one that would fit that priority as the fit for their school. Not necessarily that it's a fit to the mission per se. Maybe that is the case. That could be contextual. It may be also that it fits the priority for what they want for their growth strategy, or to continue their sustainability. It's just dependent on those pieces.
Amy, did you, and y'all can keep your mics off because I'm sure we're going to just like start talking over each other, just like Thanksgiving. I mean, that's how our Thanksgivings work. But Amy, were you aware of all of this in the back end of a college when you started this application process?
No.
What did you think? What did you think? How did you think a college was deciding whether you were a good fit?
I thought it would be like they had like two applicants or two people who have it, and they would compare them. So it would be like, oh, they have a higher GPA, or they have better SAT score, or better grades, or whatever. So I thought it would be like, oh, which one is better, basically. And then they would pick that person. It wouldn't be because of other like factors. It would just be because of that.
And Sean, what's your response to that?
It could be a both and. You know,
okay. This is very lawyer answer, Sean.
I know, yes, exactly. Like I said, I'm gonna have to go down that path, I'm thinking. So yeah, it is some of that, you know, like let me put it this way, Amy, and at the forefront, it is some of that, but at the back end, when it comes to making a final choice and you have a couple of candidates in there, it may be a lean towards those students that I was talking about on that back end priority. So you may not know what that looks like. A good way for students to find that information is looking at the profiles that the schools put out. So if you're looking at a school and you see that they want to market in their admissions page on the profile how many high schools that they're coming from, right? That's going to be a piece where you know they are trying to look in these geographic pockets because you see a higher instance of Southwest kids, and you can see that year over year. And so when students are doing research like that, those are those hidden curriculum things that schools, colleges will try to showcase that, oh, hey, this is a priority for us, because look at our marketing. This is what we're telling you is a priority for us.
Strategic plans?
Absolutely. Strategic plans will be doing that. And yeah, so for example, you know, they may put those out there to showcase transparently, but most, and I'm going to very generalizely, that's a weird put that out there, is that they'll put that stuff out there to showcase that, hey, this is a priority for us, but not say that in the admissions process, unless you're explicitly asking for it, unfortunately.
Okay. So what should a student like Amy ask to get an honest, can you get an honest answer? Amy, do you feel like you can get an honest answer?
Yeah. I think.
Sean, can she get
yes
an honest
no.
answer? Okay.
Yeah.
So
it depends. It depends, right? Like, okay, so if I'm an enrollment manager, when I was an enrollment manager, it was something where, you know, a student, if they asked me or family asked me straight up, like, hey, what are the institutional priorities? I would probably say in my 10 years, I've had that question 5 times. Like, I don't know that there's been a great deal of families who have thought about it at such a granular level to ask those types of questions. Because we're tailoring some of our counseling, admissions counseling, towards a student to give them the surface so that they just understand, and or it's like, hey, this is what your major is offering here. This is what it looks like for that major to have success, like those types of things. Whereas if you're diving deeper into the questions, you could find out a lot more. Let me reframe it. For a student who is like a wait list or a deferred student, those are when students really kick into, how can I find out how I can become admitted? But that's already too late. Like, that's when you start diving into the questions, right? Like, you already got some choice or decision, right? You got something, and they said essentially a deferral wait list is hold, please. but you never ask the question at the forefront of, what could I do to not be a hold please student? Like what is it that you wanted from me at this outset, or that you were leaning into or looking for, that could have made me admissible? For example, those kids or those colleges that look for demonstrated interest. So demonstrated interest is when and or how many times you contact or engage with a college or its admission staff, and or university staff, I should say, in its totality. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, a student who is potentially first generation wouldn't know to do that. So they would already be behind the eight ball in that context. When that student is then looked at for, let's say they're deferred, they wouldn't know what to do to move forward, because they never knew what the question was to ask in the first place. And so it's things like that that a college will stay vague on. So that's why, Amy, I say again, it depends. Unfortunately, because it depends on how the staff development goes and how transparent that counselor is willing to be with you, let alone that university is willing to be about their strategic plan.
So, Amy, have you reached out to, I know Amy's reaching out to admissions officers for me, but Amy, have you reached out to admissions officers to kind of figure out have you even thought to ask, what are you all looking for this year?
No, I thought honestly, I thought they would be more not willing to tell me, because of the fact that it's kind of what do they want,
So this comes up a lot, Sean, when I talk to students, and especially during the misinformation, fake news era, that students are like, the admissions officers are just going to lie to you. Like, everybody is going to lie to you. So can you explain, do you think admissions, I mean, there's marketing, right? So it's like, yeah, 100%, you're going to get 100% of your needs met, and, no gaps, and you won't have to take out student loans. There's marketing, right? Which I'm always like, I don't think I've ever actually seen 100% needs met. So, but then there's outright lies. And I think what students believe is that admissions officers and enrollment professionals deliberately have to hide the ball from students, because they want to kick students out of the pool instead of keeping them in the pool. So why should anybody, Sean, trust you? And why are you guys not lying to them? That's not like a straightforward question, but yeah.
Yes. Why are we always speaking in legalities? Let me start with, we're trained, or at least my experience has been that we're trained to always look for the admit, look for reasons to admit. And so I guess dispel that piece. There's the concern from students that we are always looking to deny or finding a way to deny at the outset is not the case. So enrollment professionals,
even in highly rejected situations. Okay.
Looking for reasons to admit. Now, I will say, even for highly rejective specifically, they will look and or outsource those that they deem easily deniable, if you will. So if a student seems statistically and or categoristically, based off of their priorities, not a fit for their school and not a fit to the mold that they're looking for that priority, that would go to someone in a contracted role as a second reader or outside reader or seasonal reader, something like that. So schools will use those to qualify someone before they even get to the admissions counselor or staff member, to look in that context. And they're trained to see and decipher what that means for their school, or respectively. So we're not, admissions enrollment professionals aren't looking to lie, but the hide the ball idea, I do kind of like that. It does come with this psychological misdirect, right? It's always, if a student tells you their statistics and then they ask, well, am I admissible? You're always going to give them a vague retort or response to say something to the effect of, yes, you can be. It is an opportunity. You're not out of the running. But let me say, a decent person, let alone decent admissions counselor, will be forthright. And they'll say, no, that doesn't fit what we're looking for. This isn't something that we would have, but it is something you have time to if you're talking to a sophomore, or you have time to work on it. Or you need to be honest with a senior and tell them, no, your 2.75, for example, isn't going to get you in through this process, but here are some other ways to do that. And that's where that admissions counseling side should come into play. But that's not necessarily all of the ways the case. So I don't know if that really speaks to your question of, enrollment managers lying per se, but it definitely comes with a misdirection to keep them in place. Because the longer you can keep applicants or applications in place, the better on the other end your admit rate's going to look, right? So you could say like, hey, we had 100,000 applicants, but you kept, I don't know, a quarter of that on hold like that, to say that we had that many applications continuously. Or to continue, let's say reported. So you can report it that way for the data to whoever's requesting it or needs it. So more often than not, it's going to be that they want to keep applications around so that the numbers will continue to showcase their prestige based off of rejection.
So if a student, let's say, so one of the things that comes up, especially as somebody who does tutoring, is a student will say to me, I have a 3.4, and let's say on average, and one of the things that I like to look at is I like to look at the common data set, and the common data set for this year is not necessarily out, right? For some schools it is, some schools they're still waiting. The first question I always ask admissions officers are like, and enrollment professionals are, is this office actually doing the common data set, or is somebody else doing it? Because sometimes there's a disconnect. But then we look through the common data set, we look at the GPA. And for me, if I see, a majority of applicants, a lot of times we get stuck in this, like, what is the average? But if I see 20% of applicants were accepted at a 3.4, and 20% of applicants were accepted at a 3.6, and 20% were, then I know we're probably in a good range because we have essentially 1/3 in that range. But sometimes I'll have a student like maybe at a 3.2, and they believe that if they get a higher SAT score, and typically 3.2 is accepted, let's say 8% of the time, higher SAT score, they can negate all of that 3.2 with this one SAT score. Has that been the case for you? And in what circumstances would that be the case? And I know that's, you're going to be like, well, it depends, but how often can an SAT make up for a GPA gap? And what I mean by GPA gap is not just a 3.2, but like, let's say, because when we're talking about GPA, we're talking about class rigor. Can you talk about that one? Class rigor and GPA. And then 2, how often do we see an SAT score make up for a GPA deficit?
We'll start with class rigor. So the rigor part is always looked at in the context of that school. So College Board came up with the idea of landscape. There, if we remember that from a few years ago, it's been in implementation for a while. That landscape is used to see how successful a student has been within the context of their school, in addition to the context of their neighborhood. Some schools are using that with the idea that it can help a student if they are off the charts above their neighborhood, their community, their school itself. Whereas others are utilizing it, sadly and unfortunately, in a very exclusive manner. So they're using it to exclude students from that admissibility piece. So that may be the factor. So beyond that, though, the other piece of that is looking at it from, okay, what are the highest, hardest courses at your school, and did you take them? if you had the opportunity to take them, if the school profile outlines that you did. And so the high school profile will tell us as admissions enrollment managers, like, what does it look like for you as a student? Like, why did you decide to take chemistry, regular chemistry, instead of AP chemistry when everything else showcased that you were on track to take that? So that's where the rigor piece comes in. And it's essentially the choice. But it's also still very much vetted by folks who don't have students' best needs in hand always. But it does also come from the advocacy piece for students at the same time. So it's kind of it's a weird mix. Nonetheless, that rigor piece, if you're taking rigorous classes, let's say you took the rigorous coursework, you got a 3.2 with that. So that means that your classroom performance wasn't necessarily as high, but your SAT, let's say, is mirroring the fact that you've taken rigor or that you can be successful in it. Those might be a wash for a school. So a college might look at it from, oh, she took rigor and she took all the APs that were offered at her school, for example, or advanced placement, I'm sorry, and didn't perform as well in the classroom, but her math subscore is a 780. And so that might showcase to that school, oh, you have the aptitude for it. It's just that maybe the class performance, pandemic hit, whatever it might have been, that things got in the way for it. So those would be a wash. Contextually, otherwise, if it's a 3.2 and it's not necessarily with a lot of rigor and it's not necessarily at a school that offers a great deal of rigor. So let's say, for example, this is a rural school, you don't have that many options. And your GPA is a 3.2 at this school that doesn't have many rigorous courses in the pantheon of all schools available in the context, and then a fantastic or great score. The narrative portion of that may be great because they may want to lean in on students who are coming from rural backgrounds. But the statistical categories may outweigh because that college wants to see and keep their profile intact because they want to have an academic profile that showcases the success of their students and or what they say their success of their students are at that graduation end. And so that's kind of where that imbalance will come from, or the contextual pieces.
I know Amy, like you were concerned because there is some AP gaps at your school. So a student like Amy, can you talk about your concerns going into the admissions process and some of the stuff that you did to try to get additional courses? And I'm like, Amy, can you talk about that? And then I'll swing a question.
At my school, we don't have a lot of AP classes that other schools have. So I wasn't able to take I'm like going to sciences. So I wasn't able to take like AP chemistry because we don't offer that course. So I had to take a lower physics class instead of taking that. So it doesn't help. My concern is how the schools are going to look at that and be like, oh, why did she not take that higher class? And I thought like college admissions people would not like look at that and be like, oh, why didn't she take the harder class if she's going through that science part?
And then one thing Amy also did try to do is she tried to appeal so that she could get virtual access to some of the higher classes, because that happened last year, but then this year they decided not to allow that to happen. So Sean, if you're an enrollment professional, with your experience as enrollment professional, is that something that she should be filling out into like the essays or like the part at the end where it's like, I always tell students, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, essays are for context, right? Excuses are for the last section. So it's like, if I don't want a whole essay on why you feel like you're at a deficit, I want an essay about you. The back end, the Common App, final question, anything else we should need to know, that's where I would have her put, something like, I was hoping to take more, science classes, and I even tried to get access. Is that your perception? And how can a student who doesn't necessarily have access, or even in our case, in some of our counties, who may be restricted from having access because teacher recommendations or tracking, how can a student make up for that in your mind?
Yeah, that comes from, how is that showcased in a voice outside of the student? Like how much of that is coming also from an adult? Um, and so from the enrollment manager perspective, we would be looking at, not that we don't trust students, but at the same time, we have to go in to reading a file or reading students' backgrounds with a hint of doubt, um, because we are learning about you as we go. But if you had a teacher recommendation or a college counselor or school counselor showcase exactly that is where we would be able to see the consistency, because then it's affirmed, confirmed by an adult at that school that a student tried to take something more. They had the initiative to take something more, which is another data point that some of these highly rejected schools look at, is initiative. And so if you are looking at those types of schools, that helps in that regard by having your voice showcasing that, hey, I try to advocate for myself and do these rigorous courses because I am trying to continue this curiosity for myself. And Principal X says, yes, she tried to do this. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it happen. Kind of a thing helps out in that respect. But it always has to come with some type of confirmation from someone else. So it's not necessarily always going to be held to the same respect if a student is saying it alone in their Common App or their Coalition app. But it has to be something in which it's consistent throughout the application for that to be noted in the read itself.
So in this case, should a student like Amy reach out to her counselor and say, hey, when you're writing that counselor recommendation, can you include the fact that I attempted to take this class?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about your test optional conspiracies, Sean.
Absolutely. Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to let you, what's your biggest concern with the test optional movement? And Amy, you can also, throw out questions as well, or comments, but what's your biggest concern with the test optional movement as it currently is moving forward?
Yeah, so it's odd to me to think about all these institutions who've been married to a test for so long, that they would be, because of a pandemic, um, something as strong as a pandemic, let me put it that way, would then be the catalyst for them to completely shift the priorities. Yes, it gave everyone a repurpose, right? Like everyone has to, in a personal, professional sense. But I think higher education institutions, enrollment managers, enrollment management in its totality has a difficulty letting go of things. So students fulfill a very strong, if you will, data set for us. So everything essentially that a student does is data. So everything that you do as it relates to a demonstrated interest school, showcasing or sending an email to me as an enrollment management professional, coming for a high school or coming for a visit, visiting me while I'm visiting your high school, data points when it comes into how many times you looked at something on our website. So all of that is there wrapped up to eliminate the fact that enrollment has moved towards more of a data set, or more integrated with being data informed or data driven, if you will, in some instances. To take a data point that you built a foundation on is one that I think is a little suspect that you would be able to let it go so quickly. Like, it is fantastic that University of California system has let it go, and that we have friends who are starting in the Twitterverse. I'm sorry, who are doing test free. It's all of it is, or test blind. where it's completely a wash or completely gone. But I don't know that it is throughout the entirety of the strategic enrollment plan or the strategic plan of the institution. So my conspiracy or my theory is that even though the marketing or the admissions office may be beginning to take out that context or taking out that data point for your test or of the tests themselves, they're still using it in some facet to ensure that they could save their own butt. So it's something where, okay, you're thinking about it from a SAT perspective, ACT perspective. I think it's even before that. You take potentially your school administers a in-school PSAT test, or your state requires that you use ACT plan tests. And so you use those test scores sometimes, I won't say all colleges, to give that blanket statement, use those test scores to showcase someone's trajectory for success in your academic plans. So those scores may be built into, oh, this kid came for pre-college environment or engagement, or they came for XYZ with our school, the symposium or seminar. They'll use that. Colleges will use that. Admissions professionals will use that to show that, oh, hey, you're moving forward and you have this trajectory. We want that type of student with that trajectory because we noticed from our predictive model, so this algorithm that is fed with all this data to showcase what a successful student looks like for their institution. And so it doesn't always have to be the SAT. Great, you can move that data point, but you may have the PSAT. You may still have the ACT plan test. You may still have advanced placement scores. And so it's just shifting it from one major test, one major part of the big business that is standardized testing, to some of these other factors that they've slimed their way in to these school systems or school districts with, to ensure that they continue to have a stranglehold on our tests are what you need to measure how a student will be successful at your school. So that's my theory, is that even though they say test free, test blind, SAT, ACT isn't there, right? You can submit it, you can get admitted, you can be denied, deferred, or waitlisted without them. You may still have been in a trajectory in that model or in that algorithm that showcased what your trajectory would have been had you gone through. And so that student could have been on a trajectory with that PSAT to be admitted. You come into the process as an applicant, see your grades, see that, let's say you didn't apply with a test, but you still had like AP courses or IB exams taken. Those may then be the measure, because it showcases, oh, you didn't live up to that PSAT, that SAT, that AP or IB exam score we projected you would. So now you are no longer in our algorithm a admissible or unfiltered admit
A sure bet.
to our school. Absolutely.
A sure
Absolutely.
bet. So Amy, you're hearing this, and what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that I thought that's all these colleges did test option all of this, and they've been wanting to do it. That was their plan, and that the pandemic or the COVID was just the reasoning, like just to make it happen.
So I think that depends on the school, right? And I think, so one of the questions that I always ask is, how do you use the SAT? And even though there might be predictive models, like at what stage are you using it? And, I started noticing before the pandemic, before I was like formally, I have a career where I did work with a certain group of students, but then before that, I was working with very, very wealthy clients up in, the western part of my county. And so I started noticing certain schools, a higher SAT score was not necessarily always closing that school. And so when I sat down and talked with the admissions officers, they're like, oh, like that, we, especially the highly rejected schools, are like, we know how much income the student has. So we anticipate this high score. It's not necessarily moving a needle for us, this particular score. So the question comes down to like, how are you using the score, and what is your internal admissions philosophy? And that's why I tell students, talk to multiple admissions officers, because between 2 or 3 people, you'll start to hear a common thread about how they perceive the test and how they're using the test. But then you're saying, Sean, there's other factors working on the back end that might say, yeah, this individual might be kind of brushing off the test, but this institution is not necessarily brushing off the test. So if a student like Amy has not taken the test, but has taken more competitive classes, I guess my question is should she feel like, oh, I'm screwed, I didn't take the test? Or should she be looking for colleges that value more of the classroom side?
Yeah, I think that that's where framing of how much focus is put on classroom rigor comes into play. So absolutely, to exactly what you just said, it's how much does my school, because it really does boil down to the school you attend, because that's how you're going to be compared to your peers from that school, and how you're historically going to be looked at. Because there may be, your school might be a large feeder for one college you're applying to, but only have maybe 5 kids that apply each year to another. And so not necessarily a large, big historical data set. So it's always contextual um, in that admissions realm with that, especially. So if you don't submit a test, but you're taking and you're considering, hey, if I take these 5 APs senior year, I'm going to be set, but you're going to burn yourself out trying to do that heavy of a workload just to get into this space because you're not looking to take the test. It's not worth it. Like it's not, that's not valuable to your life. Um, but then again, who said that colleges look at it from that perspective in that regard? But it is one of those things where, yes, the higher heavy-handedness would be on how does that school fit with in the context of the institutional priority, and so how does that school fit with, is this a high school that offers the highest types of rigor? If they don't offer those highest types of rigor, do they have dual credit coursework that a student could do that? Is there and then I guess the tertiary option is then similarly what you said, Amy, is did that student, or is there a initiative to go out and find it in some other capacity in that realm? And so that's kind of where it's looked at from the high school profile side. So they'll look at that first and foremost to then go into, okay, we know how rigorous this school is. How rigorous has students coming out of this school looked? So they can look at 2018, 2019 students to know, hey, an admissible student from those years had a 3.5 and a 1260 for our institution, for example. Or they had a 3.5 and 7 APs if it's test optional, or submitting without a test, for example. And they had all AP with a 3 or higher, and trying to look at it from those perspectives. So there's a lot of things going on in that, right? Like you have to take the classes, then you also have to take the AP exams and show out in every single one of those things. And so that's kind of the additional problem, is that heavy-handedness then gets refocused towards you having to take and burden yourself to the most rigorous options at your school, if not the most rigorous options in your community. And then again, if not, hoping to God that an admissions office understands that you took the initiative to try, and praying that that would be the case of acknowledgement for that enrollment office to recognize that it's not offered here, but I did my best to get my curiosity in action And here it is. Here is how I showcased exactly those things. So narrative reviews will come from that perspective, that last perspective. So like Amy, your example, we'll see that that is there. But for those students who are coming from the different contexts, the ones that submit a test and take the, let's say, have the rigorous options at their school and take them, it'll then just be about performance in those classes, in addition to on that test, because they look at all the data and the research from the previous years to say like, oh, hey, if a student takes, I don't know, is it 3 or 4 APs and they score a 3 or higher, their likelihood of success their freshman year of college is above and beyond the norm. But that's not always the case. That those measures are different for each student, and so it shouldn't be that way. But that's the types of things that come into play when a student's file is read to understand how they would have success at that college.
So why, my question becomes, like, I've had a lot of students who've gotten a perfect score, high GPA, you know, a lot of APs, still rejected. So why are students with good GPAs, good SATs, even perfect SATs rejected? And then also the one thing, you know, of course, I'm sure everybody did this for the holiday. They had their middle school and high school cousins write, how do you get into college? So that you could see their thinking and their mind. I'm sure all of us did that over the holiday break. But one of the things that I see a lot is students saying, if I get good grades and I get good SAT scores or perfect SAT scores, I'm going to get in and I'm going to get money. I'm going to get scholarships. Why is that not always true? Like, I guess I'm like, why you all like, why is it that a perfect SAT score? Because I've had a lot of students, just like we talked about AP, you know, you waste a lot of time, burn out a lot of time getting a perfect, you know, AP schedule and you burn out. I've had a lot of students also on the back end spend 2 years pursuing a good SAT score or, you know, as close to perfect as possible, and then still get rejected and still not get money. Why is that the case?
That's when it becomes very narrative for that school. So that's where a college will look at it from, and I didn't even hit on the financial aid side of things in my conspiracy theory. But it's very much one of those things where, you know, test optional may, and so I'm going to come to your question here, but test optional may have come to admissions. I don't know that it's as rampant with financial aid. And so it has been built into financial aid models and strategies to ensure that that data piece is there to give out merit aid, to give out additional aid in that context. So
in addition to institutional priorities.
In addition to institutional priorities.
Okay, so a student could, sorry to interrupt you, but like, so a student could, so a student could not take a test, because last year I had some students not take a test, still get a lot of merit aid because they're an institutional priority. Correct. Is that, okay, keep going.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And so, you know, that may be something on the financial aid end that, you know, you fit a narrative for that school. And so when you look, if we go back to that forefront of, okay, what is the school marketing in their profile? That's the narrative piece. It's like, hey, look at how our diversity numbers went up. Oh, hey, look at how the diversity numbers are diverse themselves. You know, it's socioeconomic and geographic and XYZ. And so it's every single one of those. When you go to a highly rejective and you think of those profiles, you're like, oh God, the average is a 4.0 and a 1600. Like, how is that? Like, how is that the case? It's then the narratives. And so it's then, are you fitting into the mold of a student who may potentially be a legacy? You know, you have family members attend, or family adjacent members attend, or you had an engagement from being a Nobel Prize winning type chemist in high school. You know, it's then those narrative pieces to say, oh, hey, this is the type of student we're looking for, right? That's the marketing of admission. It's like, hey, this is the type of student we're looking for, and I think you could fit the mold. Even though these are very sometimes outlandish narratives, that are put out there. But I mean, students are doing these things, and it's absolutely commendable to those that can find that and have in some type of integration or balance in a work life with it. And I'm continuing to be flabbergasted with that. But at the same time, it's still one of those pieces where you could have all the statistical categories met, but you might not be that mission fit for that school. You don't fit
Okay.
those pieces. So for example, you could be the wrong faith, you could be the wrong major per se. So let's say it's a school that is architecture based, or you're looking let's flip that around. You're an architecture major at a school that has architecture as a very
Low priority.
as a low priority, or let's even say on a high priority. So then you may be a 1 in a million for that school with low priority, and so you could get in because of that, because they're trying to lean into architects. So you have everything that they want, or you could be one who is leaning out because you're just like everybody else, right? Every architect coming in is a 4.0 and 1600, and you had one less AP score, or you had one less architecture pre-college program that you took on, and so you didn't show as much initiative because of it, or your file didn't read as exciting because you didn't have the same enlightenment others did. And so that's where those small crevices of, I guess, not objectivity get lost, but then becomes very subjective to the other piece of like, oh, hey, how does student A versus student B look? They're both architects. They're both 4.0 1600s. They both sit there. What's our mission statement again? It's to build back better. I don't know. And so then you're like, well, did they do any of those types of things? No, this kid actually had an infrastructure project and this kid didn't, and then you kind of move forward from that to say like, oh, this kid showed more of the staples of the priorities that we had check marks for versus the other kid didn't. And so you're saying, now this is the other caveat is the kid that didn't may still get a chance because you want to keep the application around. That kid could still be great.
They could be
Depending
admitted
on
without money.
exactly admitted without money, or just waitlisted to find out how they want to shape the class otherwise. Maybe there's not more intriguing candidates coming in the regular decision admission pool. Maybe there's not more, and that's how you could use a waitlist or defer list to then say, oh, hey, this kid is actually, in comparison to the totality of the applicant pool, pretty intriguing. We'll go grab them back up because we kept them around long enough to let them, I guess, wait around, to say that, oh, hey, we like you, but not enough to pluck you right now. And so it's one of those pieces where then the strategic piece is you could have all the things, but still be denied and or deferred or waitlisted for everything except the narrative in that context.
Amy, can you talk about stats and how that's like pervasive in your generation? And can you explain that concept to Sean? Well, Sean probably is familiar with it, but to the audience, and then Sean, can you comment?
Stats on what? Like our stats? Like student stats?
No, like how students just say, here's my stats. And like, so what's happening, like how you and I were talking about how people are now showing each other their transcripts and things like that.
Yeah, and our generation, we tend to look at what other people do and try to match it. Like, especially with like the older students that are ahead of us, we try to look at what they did to get into a college and try to match it because they believe that that's what you have to do to get into that college. So like our generation tends to like kind of use what other people do to make yourself look like them so that they get into the same college.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the historical data will show us on the enrollment side. Like, oh, Amy looks just like Susan, from 4 years ago. And then they'll ask themselves, did the strategic priority change, or is it the same? If it had changed, then they could deny a student similar, because they're like, okay, that's the past. Or they could use it to say, 2016, 2017 Amy matches the same, I'm sorry, Susan matches 2021 Amy, and that's a successful student here. And you could be admitted or accepted because of those things. It's just depending on how that looks from a college perspective historically, what an admit had looked like, to then be like, oh, okay, those statistics come into as a major factor or a more aggressive factor.
My biggest concern with the stats narrative, though, is that a lot of students, like sometimes I'll have a student say, I looked at the stats and my friend got in, she got a 4.7. I don't have a 4.7, or she did this, I didn't do this, or she did this. And what I see a lot is, especially in my own pool, is I could actually look at your transcript and probably cut 3 to 4 APs, and you would still match one of my students who were admitted. Or I could cut 3 or 4 service projects that were fluff, and you would still be admitted. So my concern with this narrative of stats is that a lot of students use that as a way to remove themselves from a pool that they were probably competitive for. Or I see a lot of students, go on YouTube, TikTok, and say, this is what I did. Like, I was successful here, so this is what I did. And maybe they forgot to mention that their father was a legacy and gave a lot of money. Or maybe they forgot to mention, or they're talking about their essay, and their essay was crap and didn't actually get them in. Or they're talking about, I took 15 APs when the average for students is 3 APs, right? Or whatever. And so a lot of times I worry that we're becoming so focused on stats that we're not making good decisions, or we're doing a lot of wasteful things in the admissions process that don't necessarily have to be done. And the other concern I have is that everybody's always trying to play the game the same, right? So what a student, like they go on YouTube and they're like, I did this pre-college program, I did this, 15 APs, I did Well, yeah, somebody from your profile needed to do that, right? But somebody from maybe a lower income background, a school that is less resourced, who doesn't have a lot of money, is working at their family's, local shop. They don't necessarily need to do the same things that you have to do to get in, or that essay wasn't the essay that got you in. You got in despite your essay. So I think that's my biggest concern going into stats, and especially with the unspoken things, right? Even Olivia Jade talked about how she got into USC on YouTube, and yet that's not how she got in.
We're gonna Maury that, because it turns out that was a lie,
right?
So it was one of those things where it's just like, so Amy, I am affirming, absolutely, yes, statistics are what enrollment managers or EM folks will look at. So absolutely, they're looking at the statistical categories that you just said that has become a pervasive part of the culture for your age group, because it's how they want you to think. They want it to be that way, so that you recognize, to them, this is what a fit is here, or this is what a fit is there. Jen, you're right in the fact that absolutely it's a problem. Like, right. It is
a lot of ways. Like, there's no time.
It's got levels to those problems.
There's no time that I think a student benefits from taking AP environmental when they hate AP environmental, right? Like, you could have just done something better with your time. But exactly. But then they're like, no, but so-and-so got in and she took AP environmental. I promise you, 90% of these colleges, it's not coming down to Susan took AP environmental.
Right. It's not. Like,
AP environment. Now, if we're talking calc, to me, calc is like, if we're talking, if you have no SAT score, but you took calc, pre-calc, trig, whatever's after trig, I mean, to me, I'm like, I see the triumvirate right here. Like the pre-calc, calc,
Right.
trig is going to weigh more. If I had to pick between a perfect score and pre-calc, calc, trig, I'm taking pre-calc, calc, trig a majority of the time. But AP Environmental, did you need that?
Right. No one does. I hate
like
science.
I have a
So I'm
very
just put my bias
conspiracy
out
theory that AP Environmental is the worst AP, wasteful AP, and especially after watching that YouTube or Netflix video where the girl was like, "And I took AP Environmental." I was like, "You shouldn't have." Like,
you didn't help yourself, like at all.
Right.
Right. So no, I mean, it's a sad part of how things are being built on the admissions world, or in the admissions world, is that a student doesn't ever really know exactly those parameters that we've been talking about this whole conversation. Like, they don't know fully that AP environment isn't going to get them what they need. Like, they may think, this got a biology major in. Like, I know Susan was bio and she took all the sciences, and then senior year needed to take AP environment because, Trinity before her took it, and so she got in. And so it's just a continued legacy of concern for that to come into play, where, let's say, instead, a class like, I don't know, the dual credit science that you would take, or let's say your attempt at running a couple of science projects or doing an additional science fair would have made up for that.
Yeah.
So, like, in an enrollment sense, those are the types of things you could do that would make up for not taking AP Environment Science. And that would still be looked at as, in the comparison of two kids from the same school, that would still be looked at wisely or better if a student had done that instead of taking this throwaway class, for example. Not to say those who love AP Environmental Science, it's a throwaway, but
anybody truly love
it's not a
AP
preference for
Environmental
me.
Science?
But again, I'm a liberal arts major, so I was keeping away from sciences.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's just like, what are you going to replace it with? So if you're going to take one less AP than your peer from the same school, what are you replacing it with? And so, unfortunately, this still goes back to the data, right? Like, because you're still going back to, okay, if I'm not going to do this, I have to replace it with some other data point. And that's what admissions is. Unfortunately, it's become so ingrained with those, or imbued with those data-driven or data-informed pieces in the quick reads that you may do, or that a second reader may do, to then acknowledge, oh, this student may not fit the statistical category outright, but they do fit the narrative category, and that is the more excitable or excitement piece because they did XYZ instead of.
Right. So I think, Amy, when you hear that, as we wrap up, what are your thoughts on those kind of things?
I think it shows that, like, really what you do, you have to look at what, like, especially with kids that don't have, like, didn't take the initiative to take these classes. I think using your, like, extracurriculars or doing something instead of that to make it, like, I guess, look better is what should be.
I think for me, it's to look truer, right? Like, for me, I want, one of the things that Amy and I talk about is, like, service projects. If you're just going to, Red Cross and doing like 100 hours and you really don't care, and it's really not going to make a difference, and it really is not going to tell a story, then I would prefer you go out and do, like, say you're a gamer and you just notice that your friends are constantly sad, and you have just a weekly meeting of men who get together and talk about their feelings. Like that to me tells me more about you than the 100 hours. So like for me, I always lean to what is going to make it into a university magazine. Like what is going to make you a profile at a college? Because getting accepted with aid, to me, the difference is, do we have a reason to financially, besides the whole, and we haven't even gotten into this, Sean, but just besides the whole, how much do I need to pay to get the student to close with us model of enrollment? What are you going to do to make a college say, not only do we want to accept you, which is to me the floor, the basement, but how am I going to create a narrative that you want to sell to others? And so becoming more valuable in that sense. I don't think that was a question, but yeah.
No.
Okay, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that. I mean, that's the case, right? In this digital age, is that how many more I'm trying to think about what you just said. Is like, how many more profiles have you seen on students now? Because we had to go online, for example, with the pandemic. You saw so many more profiles of students as a part of their recruitment tactics. Like I think of some of these highly rejective schools that are now putting out more and more student-led content where they're doing the takeovers on YouTube, or they're doing or Instagram, or they're doing the kind of like Billy on the Street type interviews themselves around campus. And so you could like cherry pick all these students as you go across campus, and it's not necessarily the neurodiversity, let's say, that they were looking to have or showcase. You know what I mean?
Maybe Olivia J would have gotten into USC just because she was a YouTuber, is what you're really saying. And that to me, that's actually the strongest case she probably could have made for USC. She probably could have actually gotten into USC, just being like, I'm a YouTuber, I know how to connect with the kids, bring me here and I'll do it for y'all. Right. And right. So yeah, I think that to me, it comes down to, because I know a lot of students just get really frustrated at the end of the process. And it's just like, if you want to see a lot of money, then you can't go to a college where you're one of 100. You need to go to a college where you're one of 10, or you need to accept that you're probably not getting money from that college. But then also you have to figure out ways for them to know you and want to advocate for you. If you're not connected, if you're not a legacy, if you're not, it doesn't mean, like if you haven't taken the test or you decide to go test optional, you're at a deficit. But like you were saying earlier, how are you making up for that lack of a data point? How are you proving that despite the fact that I don't have a test, I do have other markers that indicate that I'm going to be successful at this college and I know what I'm doing? So,
the sooner we can stop wrapping students' identity development in this process, the better.
I mean, yeah, maybe we could. I mean, I was about to throw out the word lottery, and then I was like, it's too late in the interview to go into a lottery. So, Sean,
yes, I'm sorry.
Amy, any last thoughts, any takeaways from today's interview, things that you're thinking about as you leave? And then Sean, I'll come to you.
Takeaways, I think now I know that how like the admissions works and how what I should do with all like the stuff that I couldn't do, like how I'd, like the same thing with AP Chem and going to my counselor and stuff like that, like making up for what I guess I couldn't do or like what I try to do.
And then Sean, any last piece of advice besides, I think definitively now that Olivia J could have gotten into USC. I want to put that out there. I think
hot take.
I think she could have actually gotten in just based on her influencer status now that I think about it. But besides my hot take, any last piece of advice?
I think that let me throw a think out. I know colleges and enrollment management itself needs to come about a transparent or an enlightenment of transparency. I think there is a large swath, and hearing you, Amy, it's crazy to think that someone hasn't been forthright. And Jen, like you said, it seems like, because you're hearing it from the families, you're hearing it from the experiences you've had, is that colleges aren't being, and admissions counselors and enrollment professionals aren't being forthright in what they have. They're speaking in the general counsel tongue. It depends, or, oh yeah, you could make it. But transparency is going to be the next step as admissions goes forward. Like, we need to be able to, if you ask the question, Amy, of like, how is this going to affect my admission, let alone my aid in addition to my admission for your college, and them tell you outright, hey, we consider X, Z, narrative Y, and this historically, then that's when we're going to be able to move forward as enrollment professionals in making things accessible. Otherwise, it's not going to be until that point. So that's my last piece. And it's, again, Amy, I'm sorry that you have to go through a process that's broken.
Well, we have a saying that everything in admissions is a lie.
Yeah.
So like,
that's our motto.
You're already ready. Okay.
Right. So we're just like, what you just tell us what you care about, and we can pretend to care about that too. You care about puppies, we care about puppies. You care about turtles, screw the puppies. Like, so
no, I get it. I absolutely. Yeah. But that's kind of where I'm at. Is it's crazy to continue to hear from students and professionals that is like, that has to be your mantra. Admissions is a lie, enrollment is a lie, and I have to pretend to make it happen.
Right.
It should have to be that way. And if anything out of this, that repurpose should be there. But that's my final 2 cents.
Ask a ton of questions is my last thing. Like, ask data-driven questions. I have a 3.2. I see that you only admit 10% in that area. What about those 10% stood out to you? Like, to me, ask data-driven questions. Stop beating around the bush.
If there was anything I've learned from Jen in the Twitterverse, always have receipts. And that's for every student too. So when you ask that question and they're like, oh, where are you getting this? Oh, here is your
common data set.
My Reddit. Here's my, here you
I
go.
Always fact check your Reddits. Like, be like, okay, so on Reddit, I heard X, Y, and Z. On TikTok, I heard X, Y, and Z. From especially IEC. From Rick Singer, I heard X, Y, and Z. Right? So, don't trust no one is my takeaway for everybody. Trust no one, ask every question. And then if you feel, to me, and this is key, if you feel after the questions, you do not feel confident applying, maybe consider this college is not the college that I thought it was, as opposed to how can I reformat my entire life to be with this college? So ask questions. Just ask questions and then blow it up if you have to. Like, not actually, don't come for me. I did not say that. As a lawyer, I know better. I meant blow it up intellectually, everyone. All right, Sean, I'm going to turn off the live camera. We'll say goodbye, but thank you guys so much for coming and enjoying our chat. Bye, guys. And then y'all stay on.